Good afternoon and welcome back to Draven's Den. If this is your first time listening, this is the show where we slow history down, stretch it out, and remind ourselves that the past wasn't lived in neat chapters. It was messy, it was uncertain, and most of the time, people had absolutely no idea what moment they were stepping in. Today's episode is the Weekend Roundup, covering January 10th through January 13th. And yes, it's landing a day late, which honestly feels historically accurate. History rarely shows up exactly when it's scheduled. If it did, textbooks would be a lot shorter and a lot less dramatic. January officially moved past the fresh start phase and into the why did I agree to this schedule phase. The optimism is thinning. The weather is rude. And history, as always, is ready to remind us that humans have never handled this part of the year gracefully. So let's get into it. January 10th gives us one of those moments where innovation quietly rewires daily life. And nobody realizes how much damage or progress has been done until it's too late to undo it. On January 10, 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense. It wasn't long, it wasn't academic, it didn't require a philosophy degree or a tolerance for footnotes. It was written so ordinary people could understand it, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. Within months, it sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Farmers read it, dock workers read it. People who had never thought of themselves as political suddenly realized that they had opinions. And opinions, once discovered, are very hard to put back. And that has never been more true than in recent years. Revolutions rarely begin with violence, at least back then. They usually begin with clarity, the uncomfortable kind. January 10th is also the birthday of Alexander Hamilton, which means history accidentally stacked one day with two people who loved pamphlets, arguments, and absolutely refusing to back down. If Twitter had existed in 1776, the revolution would have happened faster and been significantly more annoying. I don't know. I guess that depends on the theatrical version of Hamilton. And just to really drive home how January 10th enjoys disrupting routine, it's also the day the world's first underground railway opened in London in 1863. The Metropolitan Railway ran beneath city streets, terrifying passengers who were convinced they would suffocate, lose their sanity, or both. I know some people out there really hate going through tunnels or over bridges. But people boarded it anyway, which, if you think about it, describes most technological progress. January 11th brings us a reminder that progress and presentation doesn't always arrive together. On January 11, 1964, U.S. Surgeon General Luther Terry released the first official report linking smoking to cancer. The evidence was overwhelming. The data was solid. The conclusion was unavoidable. And cigarette companies responded by buying more advertising. It took decades for public health to overpower marketing budgets. History teaches us this lesson repeatedly. Facts don't always win quickly. They win eventually, after a lot of unnecessary damage. January 11th is also tied to one of aviation's most famous achievements. In 1935, Amelia Earhart became the first person to fly solo from Hawaii to California. No co-pilot, no backup plan, just confidence, skill, and a willingness to be very alone in the sky. And yes, she's been back in the news recently. Late 2025, declassified records released by the National Archives shed new light on the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, including last radio transmissions and search efforts. Satellite imagery near Nikumaroro Island, all right, I'm going to leave you guys for that one, revealed a visual anomaly that researchers believe could be her Lockheed Electra, with expeditions planned to investigate. Reevaluated bone fragments found there decades ago now strongly support the castaway theory. History doesn't always give closure quickly. Sometimes it circles back when technology finally catches up. January 11th is also the birthday of Mary J. Blige, which feels appropriate. Some voices don't just entertain, they tell the truth, whether people are ready to hear it or not. January 12th carries real weight. On January 12th in 2010, a massive earthquake struck Haiti, killing over 200,000 people and devastating infrastructure already under immense strain. What followed was global aid, generosity, and also hard lessons about coordination, equity. It happens when help doesn't listen to the people it's meant to serve. History remembers disasters not just for what broke, but for what they revealed. January 12th is also packed with moments that remind us how curiosity keeps pushing forward. In 1610, Galileo observed another of Jupiter's moons, initially thinking it was just another star. In 1908, Theodore Roosevelt used the Antiquities Act to protect the Grand Canyon, a decision people mocked at the time and thanked him for it now. And in 1986, Franklin Chang Diaz became the first Hispanic American in space. Progress doesn't always look dramatic in the moment. Sometimes it just looks stubborn. January 12th is also the birthday of Jack London, a man who wrote relentlessly about survival, isolation, and the thin line between civilization and chaos. That wasn't imagination, that was observation. January 13th brings us one of the most powerful examples of quiet heroism. In 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 crashed into the Potomac River after takeoff during a blizzard. The water was freezing. Rescue efforts were chaotic. Time was unforgiving. Passenger Arlen Williams repeatedly passed the rescue line to others instead of saving himself. He did not survive. History doesn't always spotlight heroism loudly. Sometimes it remembers it quietly, permanently. January 13th also delivers one of history's best delayed apologies. In 1920, the New York Times mocked scientist Robert Goddard, claiming rockets could never function in space. In 1969, the day after Apollo 11 landed on the moon, they issued a correction. Better late than never. Can you imagine what they would think now, watching rockets automatically land themselves? And then there's W.C. Fields, who requested no funeral and was somehow given 3. History has a sense of humor. January 13th is also the birthday of Patrick Dempsey, dyslexic as a child, competitive juggler as a teen, and proof that life rarely sticks to a single storyline. And then there's some funny and strange January history. January wants order. Humans refuse. Imagine that. Medieval Europeans avoided starting marriages or businesses in January, not out of superstition, but because famine and illness were statistically highest. People weren't afraid of bad luck, they were afraid of math. In January 1907, Paris experienced a heat wave so intense that horse-drawn buses sank into softened asphalt. Newspapers blamed solar flares and nervous weather, which sounds suspiciously like panic, but with better vocabulary. In 1835, New York City fought a massive fire by blowing up buildings with gunpowder. Seems logical. But it did work. It also caused more damage. History sometimes chooses chaos and hopes for the best. January once gave the U.S. 2 secretaries of war at the same time. The military ignored both sets of orders, which may have been the most strategic decision. NASA tried banning astronauts from swearing in January 1971, after zero gravity produced new profanity combinations. The rule did not survive contact with reality. History runs on fear, hope, and the occasional use of, as Spock put it, colorful metaphors. Well, before we wrap up, I want to speak honestly with you. The Lore Trail Kickstarter has ended. and it didn't reach its funding goal. That's not the ending I wanted, and I won't pretend it doesn't sting. When you build something around preserving stories and place-based history, you hope it finds its people. This time it didn't. Most things worth remembering don't succeed on the first attempt. Lower Trail is not dead. It isn't abandoned. It just means the path forward looks different. Slower, more deliberate, and still very much alive. History doesn't end when something doesn't work. It turns the page and watches to see who keeps writing. And I'm not done yet. So if you want to follow along, keep updated on the app, please keep listening to Draven's Den. If your family has a story, strange, meaningful, or easily forgotten, I want to hear it. Immigration journeys, survival stories, traditions that only make sense if you live them. Email them to dravensden@gmail.com. You don't have to write it perfectly. History never arrives polished. January doesn't ease you in. It throws you back into motion and expects you to keep pace. If you're a day late, still tired, or questioning your calendar, congratulations. You're exactly where most history lived. Thank you for tuning in to Draven's Den. I'm Stan, and that's a wrap.